Okay, so wherever you're at today, whether you're driving down the road to an appointment, whether you're at the gym running on the treadmill and you're thinking about all the prospects that are booked in on your calendar, or maybe you're in your office about to pick up the phone to call a prospect, or maybe you're walking into a boardroom to finalize a contract. Right now, maybe you're doing that on Zoom with everything that's going on. I want you to stop and think about this question. What does it actually take? What does it take, not talk about, but take, to be a top 1% salesperson in your industry? Okay. The salesperson who makes all the money. You know what I'm talking about. They get any promotion they want. In fact, they turn down promotions they don't want. They have all the respect from management in their company, from the owners in the company. The salesperson who leads by example because they outsell everyone else. Well, my next guest is going to help answer that question for you. Let me give you a small taste of her background, very small taste. So my guest today has authored a book, a great book called Discover Questions. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And Stop Selling and Start Leading. We're going to really dive into that book. Founded the Sales Experts Channel, is president of People First Productivity Solutions, and is a certified sales and executive coach. She's one of the 65 most influential women in business, a top 30 global sales guru, and an inductee into the Sales Hall of Fame. Please help me welcome to the show, Deb Calvert. Deb, how are you?
I'm good, Jeremy. I'm honored to be on your show. Thank you so much.
Now, did I pronounce your name right? You know, I'm from Arkansas. My mom always says we don't know how to pronounce names down there.
I think you did just fine.
Okay. All right. So, hey, I'm excited to have you on here today. You know, I love talking with experts who understand how human behavior has such a massive impact on sales results and how that applies to being a top salesperson if you know how to use it to your advantage. So thanks for being on the show. I want to do this. Let's dive right into your story and really give our listeners maybe a feel for your background and how you arrived at this point where you're one of the elite authorities on sales leadership, on sales, on persuasion. Maybe tell us a little bit more about your background and how this started for you. Like, how did you learn all these skills?
Well, I think some of them came naturally and then were modified along the way. And I just love to learn and keep trying to do things different and better. I've always been selling. I've been selling since I was 5 years old. Even 4 years old, I'd walk around with a wagon around our neighborhood and sell vegetables out of my little red wagon that came out of our garden. So, and then I sold campfire candy, and I was always the top seller. There was 1 year when someone named Lorna beat me, and that was never going to happen again. So in that 1%, selling ideas, selling products, selling services, I like it. I've always liked it, and I've always done it.
Yeah, I love that. And I was on your website earlier, and I was reading a little bit about your book, and I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about this. The Stop Selling and Start Leading book really intrigued me. Here's my question. Who did you write this for? I think I know the answer, but I want everybody to know the answer. Who did you write this for? And really, why did you write this book?
Yeah, both books are written for salespeople. Certainly sales managers and sales trainers and business owners can get benefit. But I wrote those books, and I also founded the Sales Experts Channel for frontline sellers because when I was first professionally in selling, it didn't feel safe to ask questions that were vulnerable. And there weren't really that many resources that I could jump right into and fully understand and apply right away. So much was just theoretical.
Yeah.
So for me, it's all about supporting frontline salespeople.
So it's about tactical training, not just a bunch of theory or motivational hype that typically tends to wear off.
Exactly. And even more to the point, both books are about tactical, practical ways that you can connect with buyers according to buyers.
You're thinking, as my good friend Jerry Cuff talks about in his book, you just have to stop acting like a seller and you have to start thinking like a buyer. It's so important, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. So you're a buyer side researcher. I love that. What does that involve? And what insights about buyers do you write and speak about in your training?
Okay. Well, you've mentioned both books, so I'll just frame that up just a little bit. The first book, Discover Questions, Get You Connected, that one is based on over 20 years of field research, writing along with salespeople in all different types of industries, and interviewing buyers about their responses to various questions that the sellers asked, and in the way that they reacted. And then the second book, Stop Selling and Start Leading, that one is based on a very intensive Qualtrics panel study in partnership with Santa Clara University and my co-authors. And we had 530 B2B buyers involved in that research, which then had a second phase of sellers, over 500 sellers telling stories about their own personal best in selling. And when you sum it all up, what I write and speak about, what those books are about, is ultimately the psychology of buying and what it is that buyers want to see in the sellers they choose to do business with.
Well, I think today's buyers, obviously, they're more skeptical and cautious than ever for a variety of reasons, right? That we could probably spend hours talking about. But today's consumers want to be asked and understood. They don't want to be talked at and sold to. It's a major dramatic difference, right? And buyers, feel pretty strongly about, from your research, as I was reading about that, about some of these old school manipulative closing techniques, especially as it becomes a more complex selling environment, that the products or services are much more expensive because there's far greater risk, right? We're not talking about $3 a month magazine subscriptions that we're talking about. So can you give us some of the responses that you're hearing from these buyers as you've done this research about sellers, how they feel about sellers who are quote unquote hardcore closers? I think that's such a funny term anyways.
Okay, let's start with some of the headline takeaways, and then I'll drill down and tell you some of the things that got me to those conclusions. Very clear in our research, all of the research that I can personally account for. Trust is very fragile in a buyer-seller relationship. Barriers to stereotypical old-school sales behaviors are real. And those old school closing techniques, the ones that we'll call hardcore, right? They cause barriers to be erected and they inhibit trust. These are all bad things when it comes to forming relationships with people.
Sales resistance, right? So typically in the first 30 to 60 seconds of any conversation, whether it's on the phone, in person, on Zoom now, with everything that's going on, whatever it's doing, your prospects, my background is behavioral science. That's what I went to school for. So your prospects are picking up on social cues from your tonality and what you are saying and asking that causes one of two reactions. Number one, like you said, it either triggers what we call sales resistance and the wall comes up automatically that you're competing with, or it triggers enough curiosity that causes the potential customer to want to engage with you in a conversation. You want to be on the right side of that. You have to learn techniques that work with human behavior. I love that. Keep going. I cut you off.
No, good addition. So on top of all of that, this defensive response that you might accidentally trigger, but on top of that, we have fully entered into the experience economy. It's not about service anymore. It's about an experience that you provide a buyer. And the experience that buyers want, us too, when we're buying, even in B2C. We want meaningful, relevant, personalized experiences. And those old school techniques, the little manipulative tactics that still I see too often in certain sales training programs, those techniques are just the opposite of anything that would be considered personal, relevant, or meaningful.
Well, they work against human behavior. So when you're using techniques that trigger walls of resistance, you are then having to use objection handling skills, or what they call rebuttals, to try to break down those walls. Why not prevent objections from ever happening in the first place by learning the right questions, probably in your book, learning the right questions to ask that trigger that person to want to engage in a dialogue or conversation to see if you can help them solve problems. It's a major difference in your sales ability and your income.
It is. And what you want to avoid as you're thinking about how you conduct yourself and how you engage with a buyer, the thing to avoid is having a buyer think that you're just like the rest of them. That phrase, just like the rest of them, that comment in this more recent research for Stop Selling and Start Leading, that showed up frequently in the open response comments from our panelists. And it was never, ever said in a positive way. So not only are you causing these sales resistance behaviors, these negative perceptions, this drumming up of all those negative stereotypes, on top of all that, you're failing to differentiate yourself in a positive way when you use those same old techniques that not only are fatigued, but also are negative. So they truly, according to buyers, they don't work and they cast you in a bad light.
Well, you become commoditized. You just hit it right on the head, right? So you become like all the other salespeople over here that what we call our product pushers that are just trying to, according to the buyer's mind, is just trying to stuff their solution down their throat. So you become commoditized, and then basically you have to compete on price. Now, the top salespeople, the top 1% in any industry, they're more over here on this side because they've learned to ask the right questions at the right time in the conversation that's allowed the prospect to start persuading themselves and finding problems that maybe they didn't even know they had before that initial conversation. When you learn those type of sales skills, you now become what we call a trusted authority in that prospect's mind, rather than, like you said, just like all the other salespeople over here. That's where you want to be at, 100%. Now, what do sellers have to do differently? We've kind of talked a little bit about some of the kind of how they feel, but what does a salesperson have to do differently in order to get that prospect to view them more favorably, like more of that authority figure?
Behaviorally, we know the exact blueprint of what buyers want to see and will respond to in sellers. And what buyers want is what we would more typically associate with leadership. Buyers want sellers to show up as leaders. And when I say leadership, I don't mean management. The word leader means to guide. What buyers want is they want two-way dialogue, so you truly understand where they want to go. And they want to be involved so that you're not way out in front of them and they can no longer see where you're trying to take them. They want someone to make it easy for them to follow this pathway to this great new place they want to go. Right? That's what a guide would do.
So you're more like a facilitator, right? So you're just guiding them across the path of where they really want to be. And what's holding them back from getting there? These problems and challenges and issues. Here's your price point. Here's what we would call their future state or objectives of where they want to be. Here's the price point of what you offer and what's holding them back from getting there, all these problems in between. So your questioning ability creates a much larger gap in their mind of like, if we don't do anything, we're not going to be able to actually solve these challenges. We're never going to be able to get to where we want to go. So it makes your price look very tiny compared to solving their problem and getting them where they wanted to go. If you don't learn the right skills, like you talked about, that gap closes. There's really no gap, right? And now all of a sudden, this problem doesn't seem as important as this big, large price in their mind that you just quoted them. It's a massive difference in buying behaviors, but it's up to you, the salesperson, to be able to get them to start shifting their way of thinking and more focused on results-based thinking rather than, like you said, price-based thinking. I think it's a big difference. Now, let's talk about, I love this phrase you talk about. I was watching you on a YouTube video. You say you should always be opening is a better choice than the ABCs of closing. I love that. What do you mean by that? And then what are some concrete examples of that?
Yeah, well, fundamentally, you've got to open a relationship before you try to close a sale. And to open a relationship, you open up a two-way dialogue. A good tool for that is the use of good quality, open-ended questions.
Sure.
And you got to do some work on yourself too. You have to open up your mind to be curious and interested and innovative in finding ways to link buyer needs to solutions.
Yeah.
And even when you do close a sale, you've got to be looking for the next opening, a referral, a new or emerging need, another relationship in the same organization. So this openness will serve you a lot better in selling than trying to constantly be closing things which really just closes you off.
Yeah. Well, I think I think always be opening is so important because when you show that you're open to the prospect, what do they start doing with you? They become
It's reciprocal. Openness invites openness.
Yeah. When you start closing the prospect and using, especially like, do you want the red one or the blue one? Do you want to deliver Tuesday or Wednesday? What's it? What keeps you awake at night? Like, oh, those questions are just horrible, right? They've been around for thousands of years. I think they just don't work anymore. But when you start to get people to open up to you, you become open to them, they become open to you, right? So if they have a concern, voice it as a concern, you clarify what that concern actually means to them because everybody is different. And then you can discuss that concern as two people working on a solution to solve it, right? Rather than using rebuttals or just stuff that just typically doesn't work in our day and age. Now, I want to ask you this. Everything that's going on with the pandemic right now, I don't want to answer this question for you, but what do you see as the biggest reason why buying decisions are stalling in the marketplace right now, besides just the pandemic?
Yeah, you know what? I'll go back to what I was saying a moment ago, and I'll add a visual to answer that question.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the word leader, meaning someone who guides.
Yeah.
So here's the visual. Let's imagine you're a guide. You're out in front. You're taking someone through the jungle. You've got your machete and you're chopping down the vines to clear the path and take people to that place they want to go.
Yeah.
Well, they won't go with you at all if they don't have confidence that you do have the machete and that you will clear the vines.
Sure.
And if at any point on that journey, they start to feel lost in the jungle, they're going to turn back and go back to what they're accustomed to because that's where the path is clear, is behind them.
Yeah.
So it's not just that they set out on the journey with you, it's that they follow you. Okay. In the pandemic, I think we all feel at times a bit lost in that jungle.
Yeah.
The vines start to overtake us. We get a little scared. So we retreat and we wait. We're all waiting for a time when it'll be the way it used to be. But there are lots of sellers who are taking their buyers forward through that jungle, even in the midst of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And they're doing it by differentiating themselves as leaders who do continue to show new ways of doing things, who do clear the vines, who do say, even though times are tough right now, here's the reason why you want to continue on this journey and you don't want to be looking back. Someone's going to get there first. Why not you? I'll help you.
They become what we would call a problem finder and problem solver, not a product pusher, right? There's a massive difference in that thinking. What's a question that a salesperson could use in the sales process that would help build urgency in that sale to prevent them from going back to their comfort zone? What would be like one or two questions you would typically teach a salesperson that would help build urgency in the sale?
Yeah. Let me give you two types of questions, two purposes for questions, because as you know, I don't believe in doing a lot of scripted questions.
Sure.
But one would be in the Discover acronym, a consequence question. Consequence reveals the risk of inaction or the problems associated with staying in the current state, for example. So it would sound, depending on your industry and your personal style, it would sound something like this. What are the risks of staying right here and waiting, especially if your competition then gets ahead of you?
Yeah. I love that. We call them consequence questions too, or like-minded people, I guess, here. Yeah. So it's important. Like, what are the potential risks? Have you considered the possible ramifications if your company doesn't do anything about this? It's all about the tonality too. I love that. Like, what are the potential risks if your company doesn't do anything about this, though? Right? Because like you said, it gets them to think about the consequences if they don't do anything. And once you get your prospects to think about the consequences are far more riskier if they don't do anything compared to if they buy your solution, that's when you start to sell a lot and you solve a lot of problems. What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree. I think the other type of question that's really valuable in this situation is the V in Discover. That's a value question.
Okay.
And if you've asked people what they value, what's urgent, what's important, and you've asked them outcome questions, which you probably do something similar with too. If you know what that future state looks like and why it matters, then in those moments when a buyer freezes or starts to retreat, you can remind them in the form of a question. Hey, earlier you told me And I'm wondering if something has changed, or is this still urgent and important? And if so, why wouldn't you keep going?
Oh, so you call those outcome questions. I love that. That's an outcome question.
Well, I did a little of both. The outcome is the hopes, dreams, goals, dreams, plans, visions of the future. The value is the V, what matters to you. And
okay. I love that. I love that. We would call those solution awareness questions, but they do the same thing. I love that question. I think everybody needs to write down what Deb just said there, because that was a very easy question to ask, but yet psychologically very powerful, right? Now, let's step back for a second in time before you were an author, or before you were training or anything, because I always like to do this with our guests. Like, what was one critical lesson you learned, maybe the hard way, that you could help other people avoid in sales?
Well, this is a funny story. So the lesson was that you hold your head up and you never give up no matter what. The story that taught me that lesson was way back. I was pretty new in selling. I sold advertising for the Kansas City Star newspaper.
Okay.
And I had a territory that hadn't been very well mined. It was really a lot of green space. And Jeremy, since you live close enough, you probably know the name of the town, Raytown.
I know where Raytown is. Yeah.
Okay. So Raytown is a very blue collar, especially I'm going back, 20 plus years here. And at the time when it was a relatively unmined territory, it had a lot of businesses that didn't do a lot of advertising in the newspaper. So I had to figure out how to get them in. And one of those types of businesses is that in Raytown at the time, there were 4 gun shops. They sold guns and ammo and whatnot.
Yeah.
And none of them had ever advertised in the newspaper. My job was to get them to advertise.
Okay.
So people told me, I caught on pretty quickly that the biggest gun shop, if I could get that guy to crack, maybe the other ones would follow suit. Yeah. And they even had, through something called co-op advertising, they even had some opportunity for their manufacturers they used, the products that they sold, would chip in some of the money. So I thought this should be easy.
Yeah.
So I went to that gun shop, to that owner, week after week after week, at least once a week. And I learned what kind of coffee and donuts he liked. And I'd stop and pick those up. And, we had a friendship practically forming, but he wasn't moving at all on the idea of advertising until one day. I mean, this went on for months, but one day I showed up and he said, I'm going to be down at your main building downtown. I worked in a bureau that was nearby, but he said, I'm going to be downtown at your building a little later today. Why don't you meet me there at 3? Yeah. And I was so excited. Like, I got this. Finally, I got this. I told my boss, and my boss was very happy and excited for me. And I changed my schedule around for the afternoon. Yeah. And I was going to go downtown and meet him and seal the deal. Yeah. I got caught in a little traffic. I was running late. I was, all fired up. My adrenaline was racing, but I finally got there a few minutes after 3. Yeah. And as I rounded the corner to get to the parking lot, I saw him. He was standing on the street corner, and he saw me because he knew my vehicle by now. And I saw him elbow the guy next to him and point at me. And they both laughed uproariously at the fact that I had shown up, because what they were there in front of the main building of the Kansas City Star to do was to picket, because they were not in favor of the editorials that the Kansas City Star was running. They were members of the NRA, and the newspaper's editorials were not in favor.
I see.
It was humiliating. And and I just kept driving. I mean, I was just so humiliated. And I went and to my boss the next day. I was in tears. And, eventually after I recovered, she said, you really need to keep after him. Now you need to win this for yourself, not just for your commission or anything else. And I eventually did. I went back. It took a little while, but I eventually went back to him, same coffee and donuts. And I said, you know what? If you don't like the story the newspaper's telling, maybe you ought to be telling the other side of that story. You could do that through advertising that these manufacturers will help you pay for. Yeah. And he did come around. So had I given up in emotion, right, I'd probably be a different person and maybe not so successul today. You gotta sometimes win for you.
What do you think made you, and let's stay kind of in your past history for a second. What do you think, what made you exceptional at selling when you were selling full time? And really, how has that changed the way you sell since starting your own business?
Yeah, and I will say that I'm still selling full time, but I've always said that the secret of my success is that I've chosen to sell products that I truly believed in.
Yeah.
I worked hard to find the right product combination and selection for every one of my prospects and clients, including when I was selling advertising.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it wasn't just a single take this one or don't take anything.
Sure.
But I could get creative and I could package for them what would really work. And that's true in my business too. I think that in my sales approach, it's always been about see a need, meet a need, get creative if you have to, but truly understand and meet that need for that particular individual.
Well, when you do that, you make a lot of money, Deb, right? You've become a problem finder, right? You're helping them find problems they maybe not even thought they had, right? Because when we first talk to a prospect, it doesn't matter what you sell. Most prospects don't even understand that they have a problem most of the time, right? Or maybe they see a problem, but maybe they don't know how big that problem is. But your questioning ability helps them realize, and not telling them how big of a problem is, because that's going to go in one ear out the other. But asking the right questions that allows them to psychologically tell themselves how big that problem is, and that really what are the consequences if they don't do anything about it. That's where the power of questions, the right questions, come in. I love that. So I think that's so important. So here's what I also wanted to ask you. Like we've been talking about your book, 2 books really they have, but I want to talk more about the book, The Discover Questions. I like that. What's one of the most important questions that every salesperson should be asking their prospects that unfortunately most salespeople don't know how to ask?
Well, again, speaking in more general terms, if you would just pause on the questions that are more about qualifying your customer. And if you would just ask a very open question, top of the funnel, if you will, first getting to form a relationship, you have to be open and receptive rather than finding questions where you can pounce on the very first glimmer of a need. And instead, ask about the hopes, dreams, plans, goals, visions, right? The things the buyer really wants. And then the important question is the one that comes next. And it's something about why. Why does that matter? Go deeper. Don't just take the need, but go deeper to understand, to really, really understand that need and all its implications.
So instead of finding out their why, which every salesperson can do that, you're finding out what really is behind that why.
Absolutely.
That's what you're doing. What does that psychologically do to a prospect?
Well, it makes them think, first of all, and it gives you more to work with. But what it's saying is that you're interested. You are taking a little more time. You are probing a little deeper. You're looking for context. And you're not like all the other salespeople who just jump in there and take that need to the solution too quickly. That's no different than what we all do sometimes in our own relationships with each other. We hear somebody talking about a problem and we go into solution mode. Maybe sometimes they just want to be heard. This is bonding, it's trust building, and it's differentiating.
It's so true. I think that's there's a book that I'm working on right now, and it talks of one of the biggest things it talks about is so many sellers, 99% of sellers don't understand the reason why they get objections is because they jump into their solution too early in the conversation, which triggers objections, right? They haven't diagnosed enough, right? And they don't even know how to diagnose, right? They don't know what questions to ask that gets the prospect to even want to be diagnosed, right? You can't just ask questions like an FBI interrogation and they're just going to open up. You have to know what questions to really bridge into that allows them to want to open up to you. Deb, this was an interesting interview. I really like this. The human behavior aspect, a lot of people don't understand that and that are in the sales training world, which is very interesting to me. But I can't thank you enough for joining us today. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Well, we started with openness. Let's end on openness too. This fundamentally is a shift for a lot of people. Be open. Be open. Don't look for the answers that you want. Be willing to accept and to be intrigued by answers you didn't expect and follow that natural breadcrumb trail. That's going to give you a lot more information to work with, and it will help you to be bonded with that buyer in a way that they will choose you. They want to do business with you because you are different.
Yeah, you're the trusted authority. It's just like Stephen, Covey once said, first seek to understand and then be understood. It's a very important principle to understand if you're going to be a top salesperson, right? Where can our listeners learn more about you and your training? I want them to get involved. Where can they learn more about you and what you do, your training?
Well, I hope that they will go over to LinkedIn and connect with me. I always enjoy that. And you can come to the website. The company name is People First Productivity Solutions, which we abbreviate peoplefirstps.com. That's also my handle on Twitter. I'm all over the place, and I really hope that we'll have an opportunity to open up our relationship.
Okay. Deb, I love that. Especially you're from my home state. And I was born in Arkansas, but pretty much lived most of my adult life, school life in the state of Missouri. So we are a show me state here. And you have showed our listeners, it's like a cheesy catchphrase, but you've showed our listeners really that they maybe need to understand a different way of thinking about how selling actually works for what I call today's sophisticated information age buyers. Pleasure having you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, if you're serious about joining the top 1%, I mean the top 1%, and you want to experience more training content just like this, click the links right over there. Right over there, they're exactly what you need to see next. You see, I release new episodes featuring top salespeople and sales authorities, multiple six-figure, high six-figure, even seven-figure earners. And if you're new here, do yourself a favor and smash that subscribe button right below, and join our new Facebook group, Sales Revolution. You see, it's free, and there's a link in the description below just for you. We put it there for you. Finally, I make posts on Facebook and Instagram each and every day with more tips and training. So be sure and follow me and turn on your notifications. So make a comment in the first 7 minutes to any of my latest posts, share this episode, and there's a very real chance that you're gonna win some killer prizes. And here's the thing, don't sit on the sidelines. Don't be like everyone else. Get into the game. Join the sales revolution. Stay active, get involved, learn the right skills, and we will show you how to take your life and income to a level that most only dream about.